We're used to thinking of fear as something beyond our control, something that grabs hold of us and won't let go. We say, "I'm scared. I feel afraid. It's stronger than me." But what if fear isn't a wall blocking our way, but a door that only seems locked? What if all we have to do is turn the handle, and it opens? What if fear exists only in our minds and disappears the moment we choose to see it differently? Sounds surprising, right? That's because fear often feels real, like something solid, something inevitable. We fear change because it brings uncertainty. We fear speaking in public because we might be judged. But here's the thing. Why does one person panic at the thought of losing money while another takes risks without a second thought? Why does one person dread being alone while another finds solitude peaceful? Why does one person crumble under criticism while another just shrugs it off? The difference isn't in the situations themselves, it's in how we see them. So fear isn't some objective reality, it's just how we see things. And if that's true, then maybe we can learn to see it differently. Philosophy gives us the tools to do exactly that. Different schools of thought have wrestled with the nature of fear, trying to understand it and figure out how to deal with it. Some say fear is just an illusion, something that exists only in our minds. Others argue that fear has a purpose, that it forces us to confront our own freedom. And then there are those who see fear not as the enemy, but as a teacher, showing us what we're most attached to. Take the Stoics, for example. They believe that fear doesn't come from what happens to us, it comes from how we interpret what happens. Marcus Aurelius put it perfectly. You are distressed not by things themselves, but by your perception of them. Think about that for a second. It's not the situation itself that scares us, it's the story we tell ourselves about it. We don't just fear failure, we fear what we think failure means. We fear the embarrassment, the disappointment, the fallout we've imagined in our heads. But what if we could change that story? Seneca took this idea even further. He argued that most of our fears exist only in our imagination. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, he wrote. Ask yourself, how often has fear turned out to be worse than the thing you were afraid of? How many times have you dreaded taking that first step, only to realize that once you did, the fear disappeared? We stress over an exam, but when the day finally comes, it's not nearly as bad as we expected. We panic about speaking in public, but the moment we start, we realize we're actually handling it just fine. So maybe fear isn't a real obstacle. Maybe it's just an illusion, one that only exists as long as we keep feeding it with our thoughts. But not everyone agreed with the Stoics. Some philosophers argued that fear isn't just something we create in our own minds, it's something we're taught. It's shaped by society, by culture, by the way we were raised. Epicurus, for example, believed that many of our biggest anxieties, especially the fear of judgment, aren't natural at all. They're planted in us from childhood. Think about it. Why are we so afraid of looking foolish? Why does the thought of making a mistake feel so terrifying? Because from a young age, we're trained to care about what other people think. We're told not to be weird, not to mess up, not to draw the wrong kind of attention. And so we grow up afraid. Afraid of being laughed at, afraid of failure, afraid of not meeting expectations. But if we really stop and think about it, why does it matter? Can someone else's opinion actually change who we are? Another fear we've been conditioned to have is the fear of the unknown. We live in a world that values stability, having a secure job, clear goals, a predictable future. We're taught that we should always know what's coming next, but life doesn't work like that. Reality is full of surprises, twists, and turns. We hesitate to move to a new city, change careers, or start fresh, not because these things are actually dangerous, but simply because they're unfamiliar. But if we step back and look at it philosophically, it becomes obvious. Everything new feels scary at first, but stepping into the unknown is how we grow. So why does fear have so much power over us? Because we give it that power. We don't question the fearful thoughts that run through our minds. We don't stop to ask ourselves, what if fear isn't a threat, but a signal? What if it's something we can listen to, understand, and even use to move forward? The moment we shift our perspective, fear stops being the enemy. But what if fear runs even deeper? What if it's not just about our thoughts or the expectations society places on us? What if it comes from our attachment to certain things, certain states, even certain ideas about ourselves? That's exactly what Buddhist philosophers believed. They taught that anxiety doesn't come from what happens to us. It comes from our desperate attempt to hold on to things that, by their very nature, are always changing. Buddhism teaches that fear doesn't come from the situation itself. It comes from attachment. Attachment to outcomes, to desires, to stability, to control. The Buddha said that suffering comes from attachment, and fear appears when something threatens what we don't want to lose. But here's the truth. Nothing in this world truly belongs to us. Sooner or later, we have to let go of everything. So why spend our lives living in fear? Ever wonder why failure feels so terrifying? Because they're attached to seeing themselves as successful. Why does someone fear being alone? Maybe because they're attached to a specific person, or to the idea that a good life means having someone by their side. Even the fear of death, at its core, is just attachment to existing exactly as we are in this moment. Buddhism invites us to ask, what am I really afraid of losing? And was it ever truly mine to begin with? Because when we start to see that everything is temporary, our emotions, our possessions, the people in our lives, even our own bodies, something shifts. We stop clinging to the illusion of stability, and the less we cling, the less there is to fear. We spend so much time protecting ourself, our ego, our identity, the person we believe ourselves to be. But Buddhism says, you are not who you think you are. Your identity isn't some fixed, permanent thing. It's a collection of experiences, thoughts, and memories, constantly shifting, always evolving. And the moment we stop clinging to a rigid idea of who we are, fear starts to lose its grip. Because if there's no solid, unchanging self to defend, then what is there to be afraid of? The Buddha didn't teach us to fight fear, he taught us to observe it. Instead of getting swept up in emotions, he encouraged mindfulness, to step back and simply notice fear as it comes and goes, without letting it define us. It's like watching clouds move across the sky. They appear, shift, and disappear, but the sky itself remains unchanged. One of the most powerful tools Buddhism offers for working with fear is mindfulness meditation. When we focus on our breath, our body, the present moment, we start to see fear for what it really is. Just thoughts, just sensations, just passing feelings. And once we realize that fear only has power if we let it, something shifts. It stops feeling like this huge, overwhelming force. Instead, it becomes just another thing moving through us, something we can acknowledge, but no longer controlled by. If Buddhism teaches that fear disappears when we let go of attachment, Spinoza believed that fear fades when we truly understand it. We fear what we don't know, so the key to overcoming fear isn't about rejecting our desires, it's about gaining knowledge. For Spinoza, fear isn't some mysterious force. It's simply what happens when we don't understand the causes behind things. But the moment we start seeing where our fears come from and why they arise, they lose their grip on us. Spinoza also offered a practical way to deal with fear, by replacing it with understanding. Instead of just feeling afraid, he suggested asking ourselves, why am I afraid? What's really behind this feeling? What do I need to understand to make this fear disappear? When we approach fear this way, we start to see reality more clearly, without illusions, without letting emotions distort it. Because if fear is just a reaction to uncertainty, then the way to free ourselves from it is through knowledge and awareness. Spinoza believed that fear comes from our dependence on external things. We fear losing status, money, relationships, health, because we've made them the foundation of our happiness. But he argued that real happiness doesn't come from anything outside of us. It comes from within, from understanding the nature of things. When someone truly grasps this, fear starts to lose its hold. They no longer see loss as something to dread because they're not clinging to anything external. They understand that everything changes, but their inner peace doesn't have to depend on those changes. But what if fear isn't just a misunderstanding? What if it's not an illusion or something imposed on us by society, but something deeper, something fundamental? What if fear isn't something we need to get rid of, but something that's woven into the very experience of being human? That's exactly what the existentialists believed. To them, fear wasn't a roadblock. It was a doorway. And on the other side of that doorway, freedom. Existentialist philosophers, Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Sartre, didn't try to get rid of fear the way the Stoics or Buddhists did. They didn't see it as an illusion to escape from or a mistake of the mind that needed fixing. Instead, they argued that fear is an unavoidable part of being human, something we shouldn't suppress or run from. Rather than fighting it, they believed we should face it head-on, not as an enemy, but as a doorway to a deeper understanding of life. Kierkegaard made an important distinction. There's fear of specific things, failure, criticism, loneliness, but then there's a deeper kind of anxiety, the fear of our own freedom. We like to think of freedom as something to strive for, but Kierkegaard pointed out that realizing we have endless possibilities can actually be terrifying. The more choices we have, the more responsibility we bear. And that can lead to what he called dizziness of freedom. That unsettling moment when we recognize that no one but us is in control of our lives. And that's where fear sets in. Instead of embracing it, most people try to escape it. They cling to routines, to predefined roles, to societal expectations, anything that makes life feel structured and predictable. Anything that keeps them from facing the overwhelming reality of their own freedom. But Kierkegaard believed that instead of avoiding this anxiety, we should lean into it, because it's not a problem to solve. It's a necessary step in becoming who we truly are. Martin Heidegger saw fear as something even deeper. He believed there are two kinds of fear. The first is ordinary fear, the kind tied to specific things like danger or loss. It's natural, part of our instinct to survive. But then there's something much more profound, existential dread. That moment when we suddenly realize the world isn't as stable as we thought. We move through life assuming a certain level of predictability. We make plans, follow routines, build a sense of security. But then something happens. A job loss, a breakup, an illness, and suddenly the ground disappears beneath our feet. The illusion of stability is gone and we're left face to face with a truth we usually try to ignore. Nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is truly under our control. That kind of realization can be terrifying. But Heidegger believed it's also the moment we see reality as it truly is. When we stop clinging to false certainty, we begin to understand the world is unpredictable, always shifting, never truly ours to hold on to. And while that thought might seem unsettling at first, it's actually freeing. Because if nothing is permanent, then life isn't about trying to hold on. It's about learning to fully live in each moment as it comes. Jean-Paul Sartre took this idea even further. He talked about the fear of ourselves. He argued that we're not really afraid of the future. We're afraid of realizing just how free we actually are. Because with that freedom comes full responsibility for our lives. Most people, Sartre said, live in bad faith, convincing themselves that they're trapped by circumstances, that they have no choice, that their path is already set. But that's just an excuse. a way to escape the weight of true freedom. Because the truth is, we always have a choice, even when we tell ourselves we don't. Not changing jobs, that's a choice. Staying in an unhappy relationship, a choice. Letting fear stop you from taking action, that too is a choice. And that's why fear shouldn't hold us back. If something scares you, it probably means it matters. Sartre believed that instead of avoiding fear, we should pay attention to it. Because fear isn't a wall, it's a doorway. And on the other side of it, growth, change, possibility. To make this perspective on fear something real, something you can actually use, try this simple exercise. Think of a fear that's been weighing on you the most. Maybe it's fear of change, fear of being alone, fear of criticism, fear of failure. Whatever it is, take a moment to really ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of? If you're scared of changing jobs, for example, what's the real fear? Is it the uncertainty, the financial risk, worrying about what others might say? Now, imagine that fear coming true. The worst-case scenario actually happens. What does that look like? How does it change your life? What happens a month from now, a year from now? More often than not, when we let ourselves walk through our worst fear, we realize something. The thing we've been dreading isn't nearly as terrifying as we thought. Because most of the time, fear isn't living in reality. It's living in our imagination, in the story we tell ourselves about what might happen. Now take a step back and look at the situation from a different angle. Instead of asking, what if everything goes wrong? Try asking, what if everything turns out even better than I expected? If fear is showing up, it means something important is at stake. So what opportunities might it be revealing? If it's pointing toward change, maybe that change is exactly what you need. If it's tied to what others might think, maybe their opinions don't actually matter as much as your own choices. And finally, take one small step toward what scares you. It doesn't have to be anything drastic, just something to break the cycle of avoidance. Because fear isn't a stop sign, it's a signal that you're standing at the edge of something meaningful. So the next time fear shows up, don't see it as something to run from. See it as a sign that you're standing at the edge of something important. Challenge it, question it, and take that first step forward. If this video made you think differently about fear, let me know in the comments. What's one fear you're ready to face? And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.